The caboose, brake van, or guard's van, whatever you call it, it symbolizes the end of a train. But what's the story behind these iconic rail cars? The term caboose was derived from this Low German word, which was a small cabin built upon a ship's deck. This word evolved over time with the Dutch, and then the French in the 18th century. The term Caboose possibly spread to the English language through French sailors interacting with Americans during the American Revolution. As early railroads developed in England and the United States, longer trains needed a better source of braking power. In 1840s America, railroad brakemen would fashion wooden shacks on top of flat cars or use boxcars as an office on wheels. The Auburn and Syracuse Railroad was one such early user, with conductor Nat Williams monitoring his train in the last boxcar on a mixed passenger freight train. Within the car, he kept flags, lanterns, chains, and tools. He wrote reports and ate meals sitting on a wooden box, with his desk being an upside-down barrel. Also in the 1840s in the UK, railways took inspiration from industrial tramways and began adding a brake van, the term likely deriving from the fact it would stop whatever was left of the train if there was a break in the couplings. In the 1870s, the term was replaced with brake van, a slightly different spelling. Back in the US, the term caboose was first officially used in 1859, within court documents regarding a lawsuit with the New York and Harlem Railroad. So what were cabooses used for? Well, for starters, they housed a conductor to sort documents, brakemen to climb on top of the train and apply the brakes, and a flagman to walk down the line and flag down or stop any nearby trains with a flag or lantern. The caboose, of course, also assisted in braking. While placed at the rear of trains, the locomotive engineer could give off a whistle signal of when to start braking, and then the brakeman, or in the case of the UK, the guard, within the caboose would start slowing the train down. The same principle would be applied to brake coaches on British railways, a coach that acted as a standard passenger compartment and brake van. In the case of early American brakemen on freight trains, they would walk atop the train as it moved along and apply the handbrake wheels on each car, a very dangerous job, especially in winter or in areas with tunnels. The caboose crew would also look out for any dragging equipment, flaming hotboxes, derailments, or any other number of possible issues. By the 1850s and 60s, the caboose had taken on the form similar to a boxcar or passenger car. In 1863, conductor T.B. Watson of the Chicago and Northwestern Railway had to use an old boxcar as a caboose, while his actual caboose was assigned to a work train. He realized he could see his train much better if he sat on top of some boxes and looked through a hole in the roof of the boxcar. After arriving in Clinton, Iowa, he suggested to the master mechanic of the railroad's Clinton shops that an elevated section above the roof with glass, that he called a crow's nest, should be added to the C&W's new way cars, or cabooses, to better monitor trains. This was the origin of the cupola. The cupola would create the iconic shape of the modern caboose. The cupola was placed either at the center or far end of the car. Within the cupola, the crew could monitor the train and have a good view over the rail cars. The caboose would also typically have oil, later electric, marker lights to better signify the status or end of a train in low light conditions. Some cabooses also had air whistles to act as a warning while a train reversed down a track. On the inside, the caboose had storage for first aid kits, tools, and spare train supplies like re-railers, coupler knuckles, and fusees. The caboose also offered rudimentary beds and seats. There was also a stove for warmth and cooking, and sometimes a bathroom and sink. The caboose itself would often be painted red as it was cheap, but the color became another staple of caboose design. American railroads had several specialized cupola caboose designs, depending on the railroad's needs, and evolved with time. The Westinghouse air brake system would be implemented on trains throughout the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, with the caboose seeing this change too, no longer requiring brakemen to walk on top of a moving train. Some other design evolutions included the bobber caboose, a small design that often bobbed or swayed as it moved down the track. Some rail cars were also converted into cabooses, but with time, some railroad needs required a completely new caboose design. In the early 1900s, the drover's caboose was created for livestock trains, with one half housing the livestock drovers and the other half for the train crew. However, the cupola-based design had a potentially fatal flaw. As a train begins to move, slack action kicks in as each car coupling pulls on the other and jerks the train into motion. As the head end begins to accelerate, the caboose is the last to be jolted into motion with the most amount of built-up force. This would sometimes throw the caboose crew out of their seats or out of the cupola and onto the bottom wood floor. Another problem was height clearances and new freight cars becoming taller and larger, so the cupola was just about useless. Thus, in 1923, the bay window design was created by the Akron, Canton, and Youngstown Railroad. Within the center of the car are extensions for windows to look out towards either side of the train. Throughout the 1930s and 40s, railroad cars began to be constructed from steel as opposed to wood, including cabooses. For short-haul runs between yards and switching, the transfer caboose was created. They had large viewing platforms, but lacked cooking, sleeping, and bathroom accommodations. Radios would also be added within most cabooses of the time for better communication between each end of a train. With ever-increasing car sizes, the extended vision caboose would be created in the 1960s by the International Car Company. This allowed for a roomier cupola and better views on the sides and overtop of freight trains. Regardless of their design, crews took great pride in their personal cabooses, often decorating them to their liking, within reason. The caboose would be painted all sorts of colors to better fit the railroad's branding, but always stood out as a classic end of any freight train. But as iconic and charming as the caboose was, it was an extra cost to railroads with extra crew members and an entire rail car to maintain. An experiment by the Florida East Coast in 1969 had a flashing red light end of train device replace a caboose. A 1978 experiment by the Seaboard Coastline to remove the caboose was the GE BQ-23-7 locomotive, hosting room for a 5-man crew. The locomotive was disliked by crews and deemed unsuccessful in this venture. Technology had other plans though. By the 1980s and 90s, signaling and locomotive technology had become far more advanced and could replace the job of a caboose crew. In the mid to late 1980s, railroads began eliminating the caboose in favor of end-of-train devices, or EOTs, also known as a flashing rear-end device, or FRED. These electronic devices, along with other trackside machines, could relay any technical information or problems to the locomotive, where the engineer and conductor could assess the situation. 5-man crews with a caboose were no longer required by law, and over time, the iconic railroad caboose began disappearing from mainline American railroads. The last caboose regulations were lifted by 1988. By then, a new caboose cost $80,000, while a new EOT device cost $4,500. Despite their replacement and many being scrapped, a good lot of cabooses found an extended life on modern railroads like CSX, Norfolk Southern, and Union Pacific, acting as shoving platforms, where the train crew can stand while switching. Many cabooses have also been preserved in parks, museums, or reused for some other purpose. While the days of watching a friendly-faced caboose crew wave to trackside passers-by may be over, the caboose still lives on in other ways, as a really useful little railcar.